spending time outdoors is one of our family's values. And it's, nope, closer? Okay, how about now? Maybe pull it down on the side. It doesn't bend from here, it only bends from the top. So, okay, is that better? Spending time outdoors is one of our family's values, and it's one that I got from my parents. Growing up, we spent a lot of time camping, and my dad took me fishing. And he took me fishing from a really young age. On one such trip, I dropped to one knee along a stream and scooped water into my hand for a cool drink. My dad said, "You know, honey, by the time you're a grown-up with kids of your own, you won't be able to drink from the streams anymore. The water will be too polluted. It won't be safe to drink." He told me that by the time I was a grown-up, wherever we went, we would carry our water in water bottles. And he told me that only the richest people would be able to afford the cleanest water. And the poorest people would have to drink dirty water. Kim's gonna fix me up. Oh, thanks, honey. Now, I was born in 1974, and I grew up running half wild, riding bicycles through our neighborhood a half a mile from a petroleum refinery in West Bountiful, Utah, and we never packed water. We knew where the 3 neighborhood wells were and where the neighbors who didn't mind if we snuck a drink from their hose were. So my dad, a notorious joker, had to be teasing me, right? Like when he just told me moments earlier that the green stuff clinging to rocks in that same stream was moose slobber, and so we had to be mindful of moose, they had to be right nearby. So I started paying attention, especially if it had anything to do with water. My dad, Mike, spent his career at the Bingham Copper Mine, once known as Kennecott, the largest polluter in the Salt Lake Valley. It was later rebranded as Rio Tinto in a merger that included grandstanding, such as the funding of a natural history museum to clean up its reputation with the public because of its atrocious environmental track record. This corporation, like many, didn't clean up its act in regards to the polluting of the air and the Great Salt Lake, the heart of the water cycle and the source of the greatest snow on Earth that Utah is famous for, until they were forced to, because the fines leveraged against them became more expensive than the cost of preventive and cleanup efforts. This means that as young girls, my sister and I were exposed to heavy metals, petroleum, and other contaminants as our dad often came home shimmering and greasy, burned, clothing melted into his skin, angry, devalued, and so disheartened. As Yogi Berra famously said, you can observe a lot just by watching. I watched the news with my dad and my grandfather. I was an avid reader as a teen and beyond. When it came to paying attention to the environment, I was in good company. In 1969, 5 years before I was born, Cleveland's Cuyahoga River caught fire for the last time. But this time it was publicized in Time magazine and became a symbol for the environmental crisis caused by industrialization. The Environmental Protection Agency was formed in 1970, the same year as the first Earth Day demonstrations and celebrations. I see heads nodding. Many of you lived through this history review. The Federal Water Pollution Control Act was passed in 1948 and amended and strengthened in 56, 65, and 72, including the 1972 banning of the pesticide DDT, exposed in Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. The 1950s and 60s and 70s laid the foundation through multiple pieces of legislation protecting water quality, rivers, air quality, endangered species, reforming the energy industry's practices and motor vehicle regulations. The year I was born, our nation's demand for petroleum had outpaced our supply for the first time ever. 2 chemists discovered that CFCs were depleting the ozone layer, and forests and rangelands began to be monitored and protected. In the first years of my life, wilderness areas and national forests became protected resources. And it was determined that toxic substances should be controlled as long as they weren't already in use, in which case they were grandfathered. And the EPA was granted full control over hazardous waste. Energy conservation became a national conversation as President Jimmy Carter announced his energy plan and established the Department of Energy. The Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, or Superfund Act, was signed when I was 6 years old, requiring polluters to clean up sites where toxic pollutants had been dumped into waterways, harming both an ecosystem and the humans that depended on it. Such legislation came about thanks to the publicity surrounding New York's Love Canal tragedies, years and years of miscarriages, birth defects, and abnormalities in children, traced back to the dumping of 21,000 tons of toxic waste into the canal by the Hooker Chemical Company in the 1940s and 50s. Perhaps these were the stories weighing heavily on my dad's mind as we hiked and fished that day, as he watched his young daughter scoop and drink stream water through her small hands. My mom, Cindy, is a creative with an incredible green thumb. Growing up, our house was lush with tropical plants, singing, and good food. We didn't have a lot of money, but my mom was resourceful at snipping a cutting from a friend's house and growing it into a gorgeous feature of our home. Although I did not ever learn to love weeding. I remember the magic of turning a little sunshine and water into a garden. Mint, strawberries, tomatoes fresh off the vine. It wasn't a big surprise to anyone when I began bringing books about herbology home as a teen. In my late 20s, I took my love and fascination with plants to university, earning a botany degree. I wanted to work as an educational park ranger, but because I had gotten married and had kids so young, and those jobs required the ability to move from place to place, I needed to figure out how to bloom where I was planted. I taught as a professional teacher naturalist at Utah's oldest nature preserve, the Ogden Nature Center, for 6 years, before moving to the classroom and becoming a formal science educator. All of this to say that I've spent the majority of my life staying aware of the latest science, especially in regards to the environment. Lately, recent science news has centered on the subject of microplastics. Because plastics are altered from their natural state, they don't break back down or decompose into nature's systems to be reused again and again by living things. They photodegrade, which means they get fragile in the sun and they get smaller, but they stay present in the systems as ever tinier bits of plastic. They cannot be utilized, digested, or metabolized, but instead lodge themselves into the bodies of organisms that consume them. The Oxford Dictionary defines microplastics as extremely small pieces of plastic debris in the environment resulting from the disposal and breakdown of consumer products and industrial waste. But how small is small? The National Institutes for Health tell us microparticles of plastic are usually divided into 4 categories. Those larger than 10 micrometers, so for size reference, a human hair is about 70 micrometers in diameter. One skin cell is about 30 micrometers. Those smaller than 10 micrometers is about the size of a water droplet in a fog cloud, and a red blood cell is 8 micrometers. And those smaller than 2.5 micrometers, particles of smoke and car exhaust, are this size, and ultrafine particles smaller than 1/10 of a micrometer. An organelle within your cells, called a lysosome, kind of like your cell's garbage collector, is about 1 micrometer in size. So 1/10 that big is the smallest microparticle of plastic. You may already be aware that storing and especially heating our food in plastics or drinking water packaged in single-use plastic bottles leads to the risk of ingesting microplastics. Not so obvious sources, perhaps, are the tires on our vehicles, carpeting and other textiles in our homes and cars, and the clothing that we wear. Clothing production today is very different than it used to be. You may have heard the term fast fashion, which refers to the high volume production of low quality clothing items to keep up with current trends. Planned obsolescence is built into the models of many items produced in today's market, including clothing. So unless you've made an investment in a high-dollar, high-quality item built to last, many clothing items lose their shape or begin to fall apart after just a few washes and wears by design. And this is but one way that we are manipulated into consuming more. According to experts quoted in the Netflix documentary Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy, the following numbers published online are likely low estimates. The Gap produces 12,000 new clothing items per year. H&M is 25,000, Zara is 36,000, and Cheyenne is about 1.3 million new items each year. The clothing industry produces 100 billion new garments each year. How many people are there in the world? Okay, so that means there are more than 10 times as many clothing items than there are people to wear them being created every single year. According to a UN Environment Program article, every single second a dump truck load of clothing or textiles is landfilled or incinerated. But that article was 6 years old and is also very likely a low estimate. Most of these clothing items are not made from biodegradable materials like cotton, bamboo, viscose, linen, silk, wool, angora, or hemp. Most of the fabrics of today's fashions are made of the petroleum-derived fabrics polyester, acrylic, nylon, or spandex. When these fabrics are washed and worn, especially when they're new, they lose small particles or fibers to the air, and especially to the water in which they're washed. These microfibers of microplastics are then released into our waterways, where they become pollutants for anything and everything dependent upon water, especially as they become too small to filter out. These tiny plastic fiber invaders are doing big damage to aquatic ecosystems. Now, when I was earning my bachelor's degree in botany 20 years ago, my professors warned us about microplastics, claiming that they would be the plight of our and future generations, that we would connect many health concerns to these foreign invaders in our bodies over time. Research is ongoing, and news stories are released frequently. Microplastics have been found in human blood, lung tissue, intestines, feces, placentas, and even in human brain tissue. And that's amazing, because we have drugs that won't cross the blood-brain barrier. The two most frequent routes of uptake for microplastics are ingestion and inhalation, and a recent NIH article points to inhalation as the greater risk of the two. So think about dust motes floating in a beam of light. Microplastics float around us all the time, especially in indoor spaces. They're like invisible confetti on air currents. And this information is now commonplace enough to have made mainstream news and a recent episode of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Thus far, microplastics have been connected to cardiovascular issues, which makes sense. If we can't break down cholesterol, why would we be able to break down little bits of plastic that are getting gunked up in our veins and arteries? They've been connected to respiratory issues, cellular and organ damage, inflammation, hormonal imbalances, obesity, immune system dysfunction, and decreased reproductive health. So when I was in my late 20s, I was making my son Forrest a blanket for winter solstice. He was crazy about tigers, so I purchased faux tiger fur fabric for one side of this blanket. Partway through the crafting of it, I began to react. My hands itched, my eyes itched. I was and am still stubborn, so I finished that blanket. But by the end of the project, I was having mild asthmatic symptoms and head congestion when I worked on it. It was the moment that got me to pay attention to fabrics in a new way, and I began to avoid wearing fuzzy synthetic fabrics. Prior to this, I had an impossibly soft scarf knitted from eyelash yarn and a sweatshirt made from faux wool, and I used to joke all the time, "Do you know how many Muppets gave their lives for this?" Over time, I began to react to wearing or touching any fabrics made of or blended with polyester or acrylic. I can and still do wear nylon and spandex, but I can't touch polyester or acrylic without reacting. I can't even be in the same room with fuzzy polyester or acrylic fabrics, including stuffed animals, fleece blankets or jackets, acrylic yarn, which is particularly bad when being knitted or crocheted into a new project because it's losing microfibers for the very first time as it's being worked, or faux fur or wool-lined clothing items like was twice as a result of reacting to the fibers in the air, which is a really scary experience that I hope none of you ever have to have. When I tell others about this allergy, I often get, "I'm so sorry you have to deal with that. That must be really limiting." "Oh man, what do you even wear?" "That sounds so hard, but what are you gonna do? That stuff is everywhere these days." My daughter recently shared a song with me by the band Lawrence called "Something in the Water," an anthem of angst, of being a 20-something, watching your friends get married and have kids, and knowing you're not ready and wondering how your friends came to that conclusion. Is there something in the water? This song speaks to my daughter's 24-year-old life experience right now, but I found myself relating to the larger concept of questioning status quo thinking and rewriting the lyrics. It's simply wild and incomprehensible to me that we're making clothing out of toxins that hurt everyone, but I'm the oddball that has to miss out more than half the year because I react violently. How can this be the reality that we accept? So here's my rewrite. Everybody says they're sorry for me. No softness in my life. They're just sure that I'm freezing. But the plastics those clothes are made of, they're bad for us all just because I'm the one sneezing. You gotta know, all of this stuff gets in the water. A former student of mine observed out loud in class one day that it seemed to him that my asthmatic lungs actually worked better than everyone else's. If I react to a toxin while everyone else gets silently poisoned, it's food for thought. Perhaps my joke about knitting these clothing items from dead Muppets isn't far off. After all, the term Muppet is a British slang term meaning incompetent, foolish, or silly. It's pretty silly to poison ourselves and our homes with our clothing and other household items. And fast fashion is a social justice issue, as the cheapest and most accessible clothing is also the lowest quality and the least safe for human consumption. So what do we do? We've banded together before, such as the 1987 worldwide banning of CFCs. And I'm going to be sharing some resources that you may or may not want to jot down. So if you want to pull out your phone's note app, I will not be offended and assume that you're texting. And if you are texting, like, oh my God, this is the most intense sermon we've had this year, that's okay too, because I dubbed this my squirmin'. This is hard stuff, right? We banded together before, such as the 1987 worldwide banning of CFCs, the rapid united address of the hole in the ozone layer then, although still a concern and something that we need to be conscientious consumers about, allowed us to dodge an apocalyptic worldwide scorched earth dystopian life. If you'd like to flip the script and spend an afternoon being overwhelmed by the myriad solutions to climate change, rather than just the problems, I invite you to check out the Solutions Library on drawdown.org, the world's first, largest, and most comprehensive clearinghouse for drawing down carbon and changing climate change. I contend that the so-called new green conservation or sustainability movement is really just a rebranding of our grandmother's adage, use it up, wear it out, make do, and do without. Saving the earth systems on which we depend is a great way to save ourselves and save money in the process. When we need new things, we can thrift shop for synthetic blends so we're not creating a demand for them, and thereby avoid putting new microplastics into the air and water. We can visit clothing swaps or host them with friends. Emmy is a great resource for this, I happen to know. If you haven't checked out the Buy Nothing app, it's an amazing way technology is being leveraged to reduce. When we need to buy new, we can prioritize natural fibers, which are more often made with fair trade and environmental ethics. And if you want to talk to me after the service, I have some great resources for those things. We can use our shopping dollars to finance companies whose practices are aligned with our values. And we can utilize social media to tell them what we love about their business. We can simply buy less. Martha Ahumuza wrote, "Capitalism survives on dissatisfaction. If you woke up tomorrow and genuinely liked your face, your body, your home, your clothes, entire industries would collapse." The goal is to convince you that fulfillment is always one purchase away. So I refer you back to my wife Kim's sermon earlier this month on self-care and connections. We can sit with the soft pain of our discontent, choosing to give ourselves real care. The gift of a loving kindness meditation or another form of self-love and acceptance, rather than the numbing hit of dopamine, of buying something to fill a void. We can take a walk outside and reconnect with nature and the playfulness of our inner children. We can dance in the living room and sing car or shower karaoke. We can do the work of loving ourselves through rather than trying to buy our way out of whatever discomfort we're feeling. These aren't soft skills. To quote Ellis Delaney, one of my favorite singer-songwriters, this is internal mountain climbing. And this is work that I am practicing. Let's do our internal work and build a culture of celebration around doing our work. Because water connects us all. Every being on our shared earth. A less flowery, sobering way to say this is that everything in the air and on land ends up in the water. Reverend Soto observed so eloquently yesterday during our board retreat that many inequitable behaviors have been excused because a person was a man of his time, but that other choices were most certainly available in the face of sexism or the enslavement of other humans. Those other options may have been less popular or more expensive, certainly. We have more choices than many and can exercise that privilege to change the system rather than settling for being people of our time. This isn't a tear in a salted sea situation. If you've seen the recent attempts at the gutting of many of the environmental protections outlined in this talk, you know the time for us to do all we can, where we can, is now. As I was writing this, a song began playing thanks to the brilliance of Spotify's algorithms. I felt it was a perfect way to reconnect with my values and center and lighten the mood at the end. And I'd like to share it as a tool that we can all take away with us this morning. It's a call and response, so as soon as I finish singing a line, could you please repeat it together? Would that be okay? Indulge me a little. Why would you look outside yourself when you have all of the world inside? Why would you look outside yourself when you have all of the world inside? Yeah, your heart is a sun and it shines as it opens. Yeah, your heart is a sun and it shines as it opens. Well, your bones are the earth and they sing with the mountains. Well, your bones are the earth and they sing with the mountains. And your mind is a space that creates your horizons. And your mind is a space that creates your horizons. Why would you look outside yourself when you have all of the world inside? Why would you look outside yourself when you have all of the world inside? And that's The World Inside by Rodello's Machine. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for your support. This congregation has been incredibly accepting and supportive, and I am eternally grateful.